The knock came soft as snowfall on Christmas Eve, barely audible over the wind howling through the canyon beyond Owen Oakes' cabin in Yuma, Arizona territory. And when he opened the door expecting nothing more than a tumbleweeds or perhaps a lost coyote, his breath caught at the sight of the small girl shivering on his porch, her threadbare coat dusted white with the rare desert snow. "Mister, please," the child whispered, her lips blue with cold, her dark eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. "I am lost. My mama, she is out there somewhere. We got separated from the wagon train 3 days ago." Owen stood frozen for a moment, his weathered hands gripping the door frame. He had been alone in this cabin for 5 years, ever since he had left the cattle drives behind and settled into solitary prospecting in the hills. At 32 years old, he had grown accustomed to silence, to the company of his own thoughts and little else. But the sight of this child, no more than 8 years old, trembling in the bitter December night, broke through every wall he had built around his heart. "Come in, child," he said gruffly, stepping aside to let her pass. "Quickly now, before you freeze solid." The girl stumbled inside, her small body shaking violently. Owen closed the door against the wind and turned to examine his unexpected guest. She was tiny, malnourished, with tangled brown hair and a face smudged with dirt and tears. Her clothes were little more than rags, and her feet were wrapped in cloth that had once been part of a blanket. "What is your name?" Owen asked, guiding her toward the fireplace where flames crackled and danced, casting orange light across the simple cabin. "Polly, sir," she whispered. "Polly Patterson. My mama is Prudence Patterson. We were heading to California with a wagon train, but there was a storm and our wagon wheel broke. Mama told me to stay put while she went to find help, but then I heard wolves and I got scared and I ran and I could not find her or the wagon or anything." Owen felt his chest tighten. 3 days in this wilderness, separated from her mother. The chances that either of them had survived were slim, but he could not tell this child that. Not on Christmas Eve, not when hope was perhaps the only thing keeping her alive. "You did right coming here," he said, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "Let me get you some warm food and dry clothes. Then we will figure out what to do next." He moved through his cabin with purpose, retrieving a blanket to wrap around Polly's shoulders, heating up leftover stew from his supper, finding one of his old shirts that would serve as a nightgown for the child. As he worked, he studied her, noting the way her eyes darted around the cabin as if searching for danger, the way her small hands clutched the blanket as though it were the most precious thing in the world. "Here," he said, handing her a bowl of stew and a spoon. "Eat slowly. Your stomach will not thank you if you rush." Polly took the bowl with trembling hands and began to eat, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, mister. Thank you so much. But we have to find Mama. She is out there alone and she must be so scared and cold." Owen crouched down beside her, his own heart heavy with the weight of what he knew he must do. "Listen to me, Polly. It is full dark now and the snow is getting worse. If I go out there tonight, I will get lost myself, and then neither of us will be any help to your mama. But come first light, I promise you, I will saddle my horse and I will search these hills until I find her. Do you understand?" The little girl nodded, though fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "She has to be alive. She has to be. She is all I have." "Tell me about her," Owen said, settling into a chair across from the fire. "What does she look like? Where exactly did you lose sight of the wagon?" Polly described her mother between bites of stew. Prudence Patterson was 24 years old with long auburn hair and green eyes. She was strong, Polly insisted, stronger than anyone else in the wagon train. When Polly's father had died of cholera 2 months earlier in Kansas, Prudence had been the one to drive the wagon, to hunt for food, to keep them moving westward toward the promise of a new life. The wagon train had been traveling along the southern route, following the Gila River toward California, when the winter storm had caught them by surprise in the Arizona territory. The wagon master said we should make camp and wait out the storm, but some of the men wanted to keep moving, Polly explained, her voice growing drowsy as the warmth of the fire and the food in her belly began to work their magic. There was arguing, and then our wagon, it just broke away from the others in the confusion. Mama could not control the horses and we rolled into a ravine. The wheels snapped and the horses ran off. Mama said she would find help, that I should stay with the supplies, but then the wolves came and I ran. Owen listened carefully, forming a mental map of the terrain. He knew these hills better than most men knew their own homes. If the wagon had broken away from a train following the Gila River route, they would have been somewhere northeast of his cabin, likely in the foothills where the ravines cut deep and dangerous through the rocky soil. "You were very brave to make it this far," he told Polly. "Very brave indeed. Now I want you to rest. You can sleep in my bed tonight and I will take the floor. In the morning we will find your mother. Promise," Polly whispered, her eyes already half closed. "I promise," Owen said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. He carried the sleeping child to his bed, tucking her in with all the blankets he owned. Then he returned to the fire, staring into the flames as he tried to ignore the gnawing certainty that Prudence Patterson was likely dead. 3 days and nights in this weather, without shelter or supplies. Even the hardiest soul would struggle to survive. But he had made a promise to this child, and Owen Oakes was a man who kept his word. Sleep came fitfully that night. Owen dozed in his chair, jolting awake at every sound, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the cabin windows, he was already pulling on his heavy coat and boots. Polly woke as he was preparing his saddlebags, her small face peering over the edge of the bed. "You are really going?" "I am really going," Owen confirmed. "You will stay here where it is warm and safe. There is food in the cupboard and water in the bucket. Keep the fire going, but do not let it get too high." "Can you do that?" "I can," Polly said, climbing out of bed. "But I want to come with you. I can show you where the wagon was." "You are too weak to travel, child. You need to rest and recover your strength. I will follow your directions as best I can." Owen knelt down to her level, placing a hand on her thin shoulder. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Polly bit her lip, then nodded slowly. "Bring her back, please." "Bring my mama back." "I will do everything in my power," Owen promised. He left the cabin as the sun broke over the eastern hills, casting long shadows across the snow-dusted landscape. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Rusty, snorted clouds of vapor into the cold morning air as Owen mounted up. He had packed enough supplies for several days of searching, though he hoped it would not take that long. Following Polly's description, Owen headed northeast toward the foothills where the terrain grew increasingly treacherous. The snow had stopped during the night, but it had left a thin white blanket over everything, making the rocks and ravines even more hazardous. He moved carefully, his eyes scanning the ground for any sign of passage, any indication that someone had come this way. Hours passed with nothing but the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of Rusty's hooves against stone. Owen pushed deeper into the hills, following game trails and dry creek beds, searching every ravine and outcropping for signs of the wagon or its occupants. The sun climbed higher, offering little warmth but good visibility, and still he found nothing. It was nearly noon when he spotted the first real clue. A scrap of fabric, pale blue calico, caught on a thorn bush beside a narrow ravine. Owen dismounted and examined it carefully. The fabric was fresh, no more than a few days old, and it matched Polly's description of her mother's dress. His heart quickened as he studied the ravine, noting the disturbed soil and broken branches that suggested something large had recently tumbled down the steep slope. Leading Rusty carefully, Owen descended into the ravine, his boots slipping on loose rocks. At the bottom, he found the wagon. It lay on its side, one wheel completely shattered, the canvas cover torn and flapping in the breeze. Supplies were scattered across the ravine floor, some buried in snow, others picked over by scavengers. "Hello," Owen called out, his voice echoing off the ravine walls. "Prudence Patterson." "Are you here?" Silence answered him, broken only by the wind. Owen approached the wagon, his heart sinking. There was no sign of life, no indication that anyone had been here recently. He searched through the wreckage, finding more of Polly's belongings, a few pieces of Prudence's clothing, but no trace of the woman herself. Then he saw the tracks. Human footprints, small and delicate, leading away from the wagon and up the opposite side of the ravine. They were partially filled with snow but still visible, heading west, deeper into the wilderness. Owen felt a surge of hope. If Prudence had left these tracks, she had been alive after the wagon crashed. The question was whether she still lived now. He remounted Rusty and followed the tracks, moving as quickly as the terrain would allow. The footprints wandered, sometimes circling back on themselves, sometimes heading in a straight line before veering off in a new direction. It was the pattern of someone lost, disoriented, possibly injured. Owen's jaw tightened as he imagined what Prudence must have endured, alone and frightened, searching desperately for help or for her lost daughter. The tracks led him over a ridge and into a small valley where a frozen creek cut through stands of juniper and mesquite. Here the snow was deeper, protected from the wind by the surrounding hills, and the footprints were clearer. But they were also older, already beginning to blur at the edges. Owen urged Rusty forward, his eyes fixed on the trail. It was in the shadow of a large boulder that he finally found her. At first he thought she was just another drift of snow, a pale mound against the dark rock. But as he drew closer, he saw the auburn hair spread across the ground like spilled wine, saw the curve of a shoulder beneath the tattered remains of a blue calico dress. Owen was off his horse before he fully registered what he was doing, running the last few yards and dropping to his knees beside the motionless figure. "Prudence," he called, his voice rough with emotion he did not understand. "Prudence Patterson, can you hear me?" He touched her shoulder gently, turning her over, and his breath caught. Even half frozen and covered in dirt, she was beautiful. Her face was pale as porcelain, her lips tinged blue, but her features were delicate and fine, with high cheekbones and a stubborn chin. Dark lashes rested against her cheeks, and for a terrible moment Owen was certain she was dead. Then she moaned softly and her eyelids fluttered. "Thank God," Owen breathed. He quickly shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, gathering her into his arms. She was far too light, almost insubstantial, and he could feel her shaking even through the layers of fabric. "Hold on," he told her, though he doubted she could hear him. "Just hold on. I am going to get you somewhere warm." Getting her onto Rusty while she was unconscious proved challenging, but Owen managed, holding her in front of him as he turned the horse back toward his cabin. Every moment felt like an eternity. Prudence drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring words he could not understand, sometimes going completely still in his arms. He held her close, sharing his body heat, urging Rusty to move as quickly as safely possible over the treacherous terrain. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when Owen finally caught sight of his cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney, telling him that Polly had kept the fire going as instructed. He called out as he approached, not wanting to frighten the child. "Polly, open the door. I have her." The cabin door flew open and Polly burst out, her face transforming from worry to joy in an instant. "Mama! Mama, you found her. She is alive but barely," Owen said, dismounting carefully while keeping Prudence secure in his arms. "I need you to be brave now, Polly. Your mama is very sick and very cold, and we need to warm her up slowly and carefully. Can you help me?" Polly nodded vigorously, her eyes wide with tears and relief. "I can help. I can do anything." Owen carried Prudence inside and laid her on his bed, the same bed where Polly had slept the night before. The woman's breathing was shallow and irregular, her skin like ice beneath his touch. He had seen frostbite before, had known men who lost fingers or toes or worse to the brutal cold. He could only hope that Prudence had not been exposed too long. "Polly, I need you to warm up more of that stew," Owen said, moving with swift efficiency. "And heat some water for tea. We need to get warm food into her as soon as she can swallow." While Polly hurried to obey, Owen began the careful process of warming Prudence. He removed her tattered dress and the thin layers beneath, averting his eyes as much as possible to preserve her modesty while checking for signs of serious injury. Her feet were in bad shape, the skin mottled and discolored from exposure, and her hands were not much better. But miraculously, he found no broken bones, no serious wounds beyond scrapes and bruises. He wrapped her in every blanket and quilt he owned, then pulled a chair close to the bed and began to rub her hands and feet gently, trying to restore circulation without causing damage. Prudence moaned at his touch, her head rolling from side to side. "Easy now," Owen murmured. "You are safe. Your daughter is safe. You are both going to be all right." As the evening wore on, Prudence's condition slowly improved. Her breathing deepened, her color returned somewhat, and eventually her eyes fluttered open. They were green, Owen saw, the color of new leaves in spring, and they were filled with confusion and fear. "Polly," she whispered, her voice like sandpaper. "Where is Polly?" "I am here, Mama." Polly rushed to the bedside, tears streaming down her face. "I am here and I am safe. This man, he found me and then he found you, and we are going to be all right." Prudence's eyes shifted to Owen, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You," she said slowly, "you saved us." "I only did what any decent man would do," Owen replied, standing up from his chair. He suddenly felt awkward, aware of how intimate the situation was, alone in his cabin with this woman who was still mostly undressed beneath the blankets. "You need to rest and get your strength back. There will be time for talk later." But Prudence reached out and caught his hand with surprising strength. "Thank you," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you for saving my daughter. I thought I would never see her again. I thought I had failed her." "You did not fail," Owen said gruffly. "You went for help, just like you told her you would. And she was smart enough and brave enough to find shelter. You both did what you needed to survive." He gently extracted his hand and moved away, busying himself with preparing food while Polly climbed onto the bed beside her mother, chattering excitedly about everything that had happened. Owen listened as he worked, learning more about the Patterson family, about the dreams they had carried west, about the hardships they had already endured. Over the next few days, Prudence slowly regained her strength. The frostbite on her hands and feet proved to be less severe than Owen had feared, and with careful treatment and warm food, she began to recover. Owen gave up his bed to the mother and daughter, insisting he was perfectly comfortable sleeping on the floor near the fire. In truth, he found the presence of other people in his cabin both comforting and disturbing. After so many years alone, the sound of voices, the sight of Polly playing with scraps of fabric by the fire, the smell of Prudence's hair when she sat up to eat. All of it felt foreign and yet somehow right. On the third day after Owen had found her, Prudence was finally strong enough to sit at the table for a meal. She had borrowed one of Owen's spare shirts and a pair of his trousers, cinched at the waist with rope, and even in the oversized clothing she was lovely. Owen found himself stealing glances at her when he thought she was not looking, noticing the way the firelight caught in her auburn hair, the determination in her jaw, the gentle way she spoke to her daughter. "I do not know how we will ever repay you," Prudence said as they ate stew together, Polly already asleep in the bed. "You have given us everything, asked for nothing in return." "I do not want repayment," Owen said honestly. "I am just glad I was here when Polly needed help." Prudence studied him across the table, her green eyes searching his face. "Why do you live out here all alone? A man like you should have a family, a home in town." Owen shifted uncomfortably. "I prefer solitude. People are complicated. The desert is simple." "Nothing about survival out here is simple," Prudence countered. "I learned that the hard way. But I understand wanting to start fresh, to leave the past behind. That is what I was trying to do, heading to California with Polly. My husband, he died of cholera on the trail. I thought if I could just get us to California, we could start over, build a new life." "I am sorry for your loss," Owen said quietly. Prudence nodded, her eyes growing distant. "Thomas was a good man. Not perfect, but good. He wanted better for us than what Kansas could offer. I am trying to honor that dream by continuing on, but now I do not know how. Our wagon is destroyed, our supplies scattered. Even if I could get back to the trail, I do not know if the wagon train waited or moved on without us." "They moved on," Owen said, hating to deliver more bad news but knowing she needed the truth. "I rode out to the Gila River route yesterday while you were resting. There was no sign of any train. They would have assumed you were lost and continued west. They cannot afford to wait when winter is setting in." Prudence closed her eyes, her shoulders sagging. "So we are stranded here with nothing, dependent on the charity of a stranger." "You are not stranded," Owen said firmly. "When spring comes, I will take you to Yuma. It is only a day's ride south. You and Polly can wait there, earn some money, join another wagon train heading west, or stay in Yuma if you prefer. It is a growing town with opportunities." "That is months away," Prudence said softly. "We cannot impose on you for months." "It is not an imposition," Owen replied, surprised to find he meant it. "The truth is, it has been nice having people here. I had forgotten what it felt like." Their eyes met across the table and something passed between them, something Owen could not quite name. It was not just attraction, though he could not deny the pull he felt toward this brave, beautiful woman. It was something deeper, a recognition of shared loneliness, of souls that had been wandering and had suddenly found anchor. "Then we will stay," Prudence said after a long moment. "And we will earn our keep. I can cook and clean. Polly can help too. We will not be a burden." "I never thought you would be," Owen said. As Christmas passed and the new year of 1883 began, a rhythm developed in the cabin. Prudence took over the cooking, transforming Owen's simple bachelor meals into proper dinners. She mended his clothes, cleaned the cabin until it shone, and managed to create a sense of home in the rough space. Polly helped where she could and spent her free time exploring the immediate area around the cabin, always careful not to wander too far. Owen found himself looking forward to returning from his work each day, whether he had been checking his traps or prospecting in the nearby hills. The cabin was no longer dark and silent, but filled with warmth and laughter. Polly's chatter brightened even the coldest days, and Prudence's smile had the power to make his heart race in a way nothing had in years. He tried to maintain proper distance, to remember that Prudence was a recent widow, that she was still grieving her husband, that she was only staying with him out of necessity. But it grew harder with each passing day. When their hands touched as they worked side by side preparing meals, when he caught her watching him with an expression he could not quite read, when she laughed at something he said, and her whole face lit up, he felt the walls he had built around his heart beginning to crumble. One evening in late January, after Polly had gone to sleep, Prudence joined Owen outside where he sat watching the stars. The night was cold but clear, the sky a vast tapestry of glittering light. "I have been thinking," Prudence said, settling onto the bench beside him, "about what happens when spring comes." Owen felt his stomach tighten. "Oh, I am not sure California is the right destination anymore," she continued softly. "Everything I thought I knew about what I wanted, it has changed since we came here, or maybe it has just become clearer." "What do you mean?" Owen asked, not daring to hope. Prudence turned to face him, her green eyes luminous in the starlight. "I mean that I have felt more at home in these past weeks, here in this cabin with you, than I felt in all the months on the trail. I mean that Polly has smiled more and laughed more than she has since her father died. I mean that when I think about leaving here, about saying goodbye to you, it feels wrong." Owen's heart was pounding so hard he was certain she must be able to hear it. "Prudence, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Owen Oakes," Prudence said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I know it is too soon. I know I am supposed to be in mourning. I know you may not feel the same way. But I have learned that life is too short and too uncertain to waste time pretending not to feel what I feel. I love you, and if there is any chance you might feel the same way, I want to know." For a moment, Owen could not speak. Joy and fear warred within him, making his throat tight and his hands shake. Finally, he found his voice. "I thought I was content alone," he said slowly. "I thought I did not need anyone, did not want the complications that come with caring for someone, but you changed everything. From the moment I saw you lying in the snow, something in me woke up that I thought was dead. And these past weeks, watching you with Polly, talking to you by the fire, working beside you, I have realized something. I love you too, Prudence. I love you and I love your daughter, and I do not want you to leave. Not in the spring. Not ever." Prudence let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then she was in his arms, her face pressed against his chest, her body shaking with emotion. Owen held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the rightness of her in his embrace. "Marry me," he said impulsively. "Stay here and marry me. I know I do not have much to offer, just this cabin and whatever I can pull from the earth. But I will work every day to make you happy, to give you and Polly a good life. Say yes, Prudence. Please say yes." Prudence pulled back just enough to look up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen. I cannot think of anything I want more." He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that deepened as she responded, her arms winding around his neck. It was a kiss full of promise, of hope, of all the lonely years finally coming to an end. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Prudence was smiling through her tears. "Polly will be so happy," she said. "She talks about you constantly, asks me every day if you will be her new papa." "What do you tell her?" Owen asked, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "I tell her we will have to wait and see what the future brings," Prudence said. "But in my heart, I have been hoping for exactly this." They sat together under the stars, making plans and dreaming of their future. Owen explained that while his prospecting had not made him rich, he had saved enough money to expand the cabin, to buy livestock, to perhaps start a small ranch. Prudence talked about creating a real home, about teaching Polly properly, about maybe one day having more children. "I always wanted a large family," she admitted. Thomas and I had hoped for more children, but it never happened. Now I am 24 and I am worried that maybe I cannot have any more. We will have whatever children God sees fit to bless us with, Owen said. And if it is just Polly, then we will pour all our love into her and count ourselves lucky. When Polly woke the next morning and they told her the news, she let out a shriek of joy that probably echoed all the way to Yuma. She threw herself at Owen, hugging him with all the strength in her small body. "I knew it," she exclaimed. "I knew you were supposed to be my new papa. I have been praying for it every night." Owen found himself blinking back tears as he hugged the little girl back. "I would be honored to be your papa, Polly, if you will have me. Of course I will have you. You saved us and you are kind and you make Mama smile, and that makes you the best papa in the whole world." They decided to wait until spring to travel to Yuma for a proper wedding. Prudence wanted to be married by a preacher in a church, with witnesses and all the traditional ceremonies. Owen agreed, though in his heart he already felt married to her. Every day that passed only deepened his love, his certainty that fate had brought them together. February melted into March, and the harsh winter gave way to the gentle warmth of early spring. The desert bloomed, carpeting the earth with wildflowers in every color imaginable. Owen began work on expanding the cabin, adding a second room for Polly and making plans for future additions. Prudence planted a garden, turning the hard desert soil and coaxing life from it with patience and determination. In early April, when the weather was clear and warm, they made the journey to Yuma. The town had grown since Owen's last visit, with new buildings springing up to serve the increasing traffic of settlers heading west. They found a boarding house run by a kind widow who gave them good rates and helped Prudence acquire a proper wedding dress, a simple but beautiful white gown with lace at the collar and cuffs. The wedding took place on a Sunday morning at the small Catholic church on the edge of town. Father Miguel, who served the growing community, performed the ceremony in both English and Spanish, his voice warm with blessing. Polly stood beside her mother, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, her face glowing with happiness. Several townspeople who had befriended them over the past week attended, happy to witness the union. When Owen slipped the simple gold band onto Prudence's finger and spoke his vows, his voice was thick with emotion. "I promise to love you and honor you all the days of my life. I promise to be a good husband to you and a good father to Polly. I promise to work hard to provide for our family, to stand by you no matter what challenges we face. This I swear before God and these witnesses." Prudence's vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to love you and support you always. I promise to make our house a home, to stand beside you in good times and bad, to be faithful and true until my last breath. You have given me and my daughter a second chance at happiness, and I will spend every day showing you how grateful I am. This I swear before God and these witnesses." When Father Miguel pronounced them man and wife and Owen kissed his bride, there was not a dry eye in the church. Even the priest had to pause to wipe his face before offering the final blessing. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. The widow who ran the boarding house had prepared a feast, and the townspeople brought gifts of practical household items, seeds for the garden, tools for building. There was music and dancing, and Owen, who had never been much for such things, found himself laughing as Prudence pulled him into a simple waltz. "I did not know you could dance," she teased, her eyes sparkling. "I cannot," Owen admitted, "but for you I will try." That night, after Polly had fallen asleep in the small room the widow had provided, Owen and Prudence finally came together as husband and wife. Their lovemaking was gentle and passionate by turns, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and awed. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Prudence traced patterns on Owen's chest. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Taking us in? Your life was so simple before we arrived." "Simple is not the same as good," Owen replied, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips. "My life before was empty. You and Polly have filled it with purpose and joy. I have never been happier than I am right now." "Good," Prudence said, snuggling closer, "because I plan to make you even happier in the years to come." They returned to the cabin a few days later, traveling as a family now, legally bound and spiritually united. The desert had never looked more beautiful to Owen, and when they crested the final rise and saw his cabin, now their home, waiting in the valley below, he felt a profound sense of peace. The months that followed were busy and productive. Owen's prospecting finally paid off when he discovered a decent vein of silver in the hills. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to fund significant improvements to their property. He hired men from Yuma to help him build a proper ranch house, larger and more comfortable than the cabin, with separate bedrooms and a real kitchen that made Prudence cry with happiness. He bought cattle and started a small herd, planning to supplement his mining income with ranching. Prudence's garden flourished, providing vegetables that she sold in Yuma along with preserves and baked goods. Polly thrived in the stable, loving environment, growing taller and stronger, her laughter a constant presence in their home. In the fall of 1883, Prudence discovered she was with child. The news filled Owen with a joy so intense it was almost frightening. He became even more protective, insisting that she rest more, let him handle the heavier chores. Prudence tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from a place of love. "I am not fragile," she reminded him one evening as he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I am a ranch wife. We are sturdy creatures." "You are my wife and you are carrying my child," Owen replied stubbornly. "Let me take care of you, it makes me happy." "You make me happy," Prudence said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Every single day you make me happy." Polly was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a big sister. She helped Prudence sew baby clothes and prepare a nursery in one of the new bedrooms. She talked constantly about all the things she would teach the baby, all the ways she would help. The baby came in early May of 1884, on a warm evening when the desert air was sweet with the scent of blooming sage. The midwife from Yuma had come to stay with them a week before, and she guided Prudence through the labor with calm expertise. Owen paced outside the bedroom, Polly beside him, both of them jumping at every sound. When the baby's first cry split the air, Owen felt his knees go weak with relief. The midwife emerged a few minutes later, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she announced. "A healthy, strong boy, and your wife is doing well. You can go in now." Owen entered the bedroom on shaking legs and found Prudence propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. When she looked up at him, her eyes were filled with tears of joy. "Owen, come meet your son." He approached slowly, almost reverently, and when Prudence placed the baby in his arms, Owen felt something inside him break and remake itself simultaneously. The infant was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. When the baby opened his eyes, they were blue like Owen's. "What should we name him?" Prudence asked softly. Owen had been thinking about this for months. "Oscar," he said. "Oscar Thomas Oakes. Thomas for your first husband, because without him you would never have come west and we would never have found each other." Prudence's tears spilled over. "That is perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Polly was allowed in to meet her baby brother, and she was overcome with awe and delight. "He is so small," she breathed, gently touching Oscar's hand. I promised to be the best big sister ever. The years that followed were full and rich. Owen's silver mine played out eventually, but by then the ranch was thriving. He expanded his cattle operation, hired a few ranch hands, and became a respected member of the small community that was growing up around Yuma. Prudence's business selling preserves and baked goods grew until she was supplying several stores in town, and she became known as one of the best cooks in the territory. Polly grew into a beautiful young woman, intelligent and kind, with her mother's determination and her stepfather's quiet strength. She helped run the ranch, managed the books with a head for numbers that amazed Owen, and eventually caught the eye of a young schoolteacher who moved to Yuma in 1890. Owen gave his blessing for their marriage with pride, and only a small pang of sadness at watching his little girl become a woman. More children followed Oscar. A daughter, Pearl, was born in 1886, with Prudence's auburn hair and green eyes. Another son, Oliver, arrived in 1888, loud and demanding from his first breath. Twins, a boy and girl named Otis and Penelope, came as a surprise in 1890, filling the house with even more chaos and laughter. The ranch house expanded again to accommodate the growing family. Owen built a large dining table where they all gathered for meals, talking and laughing and planning their days. He never took any of it for granted, never forgot those lonely years in the cabin before Polly knocked on his door that Christmas Eve. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, Owen took Prudence back to the old cabin, which still stood in the hills, now used as a line shack for the ranch hands. They stood together in the doorway, looking at the simple room where their life together had begun. "Do you remember how scared I was that you would send us away?" Prudence asked, leaning against his shoulder. "I could never have done that," Owen replied. "Even before I knew I loved you, something in me recognized that you were supposed to be here, that Polly knocking on my door was destiny." "Best Christmas present I ever received," Prudence said with a smile. "A lonely cowboy with a good heart and the will to search a frozen desert for a woman he had never met." "Best Christmas present I ever received was you," Owen countered. "You and Polly and all the children we have been blessed with. You took my empty life and filled it with purpose and love." They kissed there in the doorway of the old cabin, surrounded by memories of their beginning, secure in the knowledge that their future stretched bright before them. As the years continued to pass, Owen and Prudence grew old together, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren. Polly's children, Oscar's children, Pearl's children, Oliver's children, all of them running through the ranch house, filling it with noise and energy and life. Owen taught his sons and grandsons how to work the land, how to care for cattle, how to be men of integrity and honor. Prudence taught her daughters and granddaughters how to run a household, how to be strong and independent, how to choose love even when it seemed impossible. The story of how they met became family legend. Every Christmas Eve, the family would gather and the children would beg to hear it again. How a little girl knocked on a lonely cowboy's door, lost and afraid. How that cowboy risked everything to find her mother. How a Christmas miracle brought them all together and created a family from loneliness and loss. In 1910, when Owen was 60 years old and Prudence was 51, they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sun set over the desert they both loved. Their children were grown and scattered, some running the ranch, others pursuing different dreams. But they all came home for Christmas, bringing the grandchildren, filling the house with the same warmth and laughter that had always defined it. "You think Polly knew?" Prudence asked, her hand clasped in Owen's. "That Christmas Eve when she knocked on your door, do you think some part of her knew what would happen?" I think children see the world more clearly than we do sometimes, Owen replied thoughtfully. Maybe she did know. Or maybe she just trusted that things would work out the way they were supposed to. I am glad she trusted, Prudence said softly. I am glad she was brave enough to knock on a stranger's door. I am glad you were kind enough to open it. I am glad for all of it, Owen said. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would not change a single thing. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, the desert cooling around them, the sounds of their family drifting out from the house behind them. In the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. Closer, a grandchild laughed at something their parents said. This was happiness, Owen thought. Not the absence of hardship, because God knew they had faced plenty of that over the years, but the presence of love, deep and abiding, tested by time and proven true. The presence of family, blood and chosen, woven together into something stronger than any individual strand. When Polly arrived for Christmas that year with her own grown children and new grandchildren in tow, she found her parents on the porch and joined them, settling into a chair with a happy sigh. I was just thinking about that Christmas, she said without preamble. The one when everything changed. We were just talking about that too, Prudence said with a smile. Amazing how one night can alter the course of so many lives. I was so scared, Polly remembered. But when you opened that door, Papa, and I saw your face, something in me just knew I would be all right. That we would be all right. Owen reached out and took her hand, still marveling that this confident, capable woman was the same frightened child who had appeared on his doorstep 27 years ago. We were all meant to find each other, he said. I truly believe that. So do I, Polly agreed. I tell my children and grandchildren all the time that miracles are real, that God puts people in our path exactly when we need them, that love can grow from the most unlikely circumstances. That is a good lesson, Prudence said, one we have lived. As the family gathered for Christmas dinner that year, the table stretching the length of the dining room and spilling into the parlor to accommodate everyone, Owen looked around at all the faces and felt his heart swell, almost painfully. These were his people, his legacy, the living proof that taking a chance on love had been the best decision of his life. When they said grace before the meal, Owen added his own silent prayer of thanksgiving, for Polly's courage in seeking help, for Prudence's strength in surviving, for his own willingness to open his door and his heart, for every day since that had built this beautiful, chaotic, perfect family. The years continued their steady march. Owen and Prudence celebrated their 20th anniversary, then their 25th. Their children gave them more grandchildren, and those grandchildren began having children of their own. The ranch prospered, expanding to thousands of acres, employing dozens of workers, becoming one of the most successful operations in the Arizona Territory. Through it all, Owen and Prudence remained the heart of the family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their love for each other never wavered, never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect. They worked side by side until age finally forced them to slow down, handing over more responsibility to their children but never fully retiring. The ranch was their life's work, and they could not imagine being separated from it. In 1920, as Owen approached 70 and Prudence 61, they made a trip back to the original cabin one last time. It was still standing, though weathered and worn by decades of use. They sat inside on the same furniture that had witnessed the beginning of their love story, and they talked about everything and nothing. I never imagined living this long, Owen admitted. Never thought I would have reason to want to. And now, Prudence prompted. Now I wish I could live forever, just to have more time with you," he said simply. "We have been blessed with more than most people get," Prudence reminded him. "More love, more family, more happiness than I ever dreamed possible. When the time comes for us to go, we can go knowing we lived fully, we loved deeply, and we left the world better than we found it." "Always the wise one," Owen said, pulling her close. "I learned from the best," Prudence replied, kissing his weathered cheek. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913 with a massive party at the ranch. All 5 of their surviving children attended, along with what seemed like hundreds of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. There was music and dancing, food enough to feed an army, and toast after toast honoring the couple who had built such an incredible legacy. Polly, now in her late 40s but still beautiful, gave a speech that left everyone in tears. She talked about the scared little girl who had knocked on a stranger's door, about the mother who had nearly died trying to find help, about the lonely cowboy who had risked everything to save them both. She talked about how love had transformed all their lives, had created something beautiful and lasting from tragedy and loss. "My father, Thomas Patterson, gave me life," Polly said, looking directly at Owen. "But you, Owen Oakes, gave me a childhood, a family, a foundation of love and security that shaped me into the woman I am today. You loved my mother when she had nothing to offer but herself and a damaged child. You built us a home, not just with your hands but with your heart. And you have shown all of us what it means to love unconditionally, to serve selflessly, to live with honor and integrity. I could not be more proud to call you my father." Owen could not speak through the lump in his throat, could only nod and embrace his daughter while Prudence wept happy tears beside him. The party continued late into the night, with children falling asleep on blankets under the stars, just as Polly had done so many years ago. Owen and Prudence danced together, their bodies knowing each other so well that no words were needed to stay in perfect rhythm. 30 years, Prudence marveled. "It feels like both a lifetime and a moment." "Every day with you has been a gift," Owen said. "I mean that. Even the hard days, the days when money was tight or the cattle were sick or the children were struggling. Having you beside me made everything bearable." "We made a good team," Prudence agreed. "The best team." As they grew older still, their children took over more of the ranch operations, but Owen and Prudence remained active as long as they could. They loved sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset, talking about their lives with the perspective that only age can bring. In the winter of 1923, Prudence fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of doctors from Yuma and even Phoenix, she weakened rapidly. Owen never left her side, holding her hand, talking to her about their life together, making sure she knew how much she was loved. On a cold January night, surrounded by all 5 of their children and many of their grandchildren, Prudence Patricia Patterson Oakes passed peacefully from this world. Her last words were to Owen, "Wait for me. I will find you again, just like I found you before." "I will wait," Owen promised, his voice breaking. "However long it takes." The grief of losing Prudence nearly destroyed Owen. For months he barely ate, barely slept, wandering the ranch like a ghost. His children worried he would simply give up, let himself fade away. But gradually, the strength that had carried him through so many challenges reasserted itself. He realized that Prudence would not want him to waste whatever time he had left mourning. She would want him to live, to love his family, to find joy in the legacy they had built together. So he forced himself to re-engage with life, spending time with his children and grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandmother, making sure her memory lived on vibrantly. Owen Oakes lived another 5 years after Prudence's death, growing frailer but never losing the sharp mind and kind heart that had defined him. He spent his final years documenting the family history, writing down every story he could remember about how the ranch had grown, how the family had flourished, how one snowy Christmas Eve had changed everything. On Christmas Eve of 1928, exactly 45 years after a lost little girl had knocked on his door, Owen Oakes passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 78 years old, surrounded by family, his work complete. The ranch he and Prudence had built was thriving, would continue to thrive for generations. The children they had raised were good people doing good work in the world. The love they had shared would echo through time in the lives of all who came after. Polly, now in her 60s herself, organized a funeral that celebrated both her parents' lives. She told the story one more time, for the benefit of the youngest great-grandchildren who had never heard it. How a scared little girl found courage in desperation. How a lonely cowboy opened his door and his heart. How a mother was saved from certain death. How love grew from the most unlikely beginning into something that changed the course of countless lives. The ranch remained in the Oakes family for generations, growing and changing with the times but always maintaining the values Owen and Prudence had instilled. Kindness to strangers, hard work, integrity, the understanding that family is not just about blood but about choosing to love and be loved. Every Christmas Eve, the family gathered at the old ranch house, now preserved as a historic landmark. They told the story of Owen and Prudence, making sure each new generation understood where they came from, what sacrifice and courage and love had built the foundation they stood on. And sometimes, on quiet winter nights when snow fell soft on the Arizona desert, people swore they could see two figures on the ranch house porch, hands clasped, looking out over the land they had loved and nurtured together. A cowboy and his bride, reunited at last, watching over the family that had begun with a knock on a door and a choice to help a stranger in need. The legacy of Owen Oakes and Prudence Patterson was not measured in acres or cattle or money, though they had left plenty of all three. Their true legacy was love, the kind that transforms lives, that builds communities, that echoes through generations. They had proven that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest acts of kindness, that miracles can happen when you open your door to someone in need, that love found in the most unlikely circumstances can be the strongest and truest of all. Their story became part of the fabric of Yuma's history, told and retold, inspiring others to take chances on love, to help strangers, to believe in second chances and new beginnings. The little church where they were married became a popular spot for weddings, with couples hoping some of Owen and Prudence's magic would bless their own unions. The original cabin where it all began was eventually moved to the ranch house grounds and preserved as a museum of sorts, filled with artifacts from those early days. Visitors could see the simple furniture, the fireplace where Polly had warmed herself, the bed where Prudence had recovered from her ordeal. They could stand in the doorway and imagine a snowy Christmas Eve, a knock, a choice that changed everything. And they could leave with the understanding that love stories are not always easy or simple, but they are always worth fighting for, worth building on, worth honoring for all the days of our lives. Owen and Prudence had understood that, had lived it, and in doing so had given their family a gift that would never diminish, never fade, never be forgotten. The desert wind still blew across the ranch, carrying whispers of laughter and promises spoken long ago. The mountains still stood sentinel over the valley, where Owen and Prudence had built their home. And somewhere beyond the veil of mortality, A cowboy and his bride danced under desert stars, their love story complete, their legacy secure, their hearts finally and forever joined as they had always been meant to be.